expect that almost everyone here today has probably had the experience of staying in a motel at least one time in your life. I could be wrong about that, but my guess is the majority of us have had that experience. A motel is a place where you stay when you can't be at home. They are considered temporary lodging for the most part. A motel is a place to stay when you are traveling. You may be on a vacation or attending a conference or a meeting, or maybe it is a place to work for a short time when you need to do some business. It might be a place to stay when you're attending a big convention, or maybe it's a wedding or a wedding reception, or perhaps a family reunion. Motels have a very well-used place in our life, and they serve their purposes well. So here's the next question. Have you ever been at a motel on Christmas? Anybody? I'm the only one. Well, I have. There have been some times when I have gone to visit family at Christmas and there's not enough room for everyone to stay at their house. So I would go to the motel. You know, there's a different feeling at a motel on Christmas. Even the very best motel seems dismal. The few workers who are there are likely to act like they've been drafted into service, which they usually have been. Most of the dining areas are closed. You hope that you have a dinner invitation somewhere, otherwise it's a vending machine opportunity. There's kind of a peculiar stillness about the building, not the usual rustle of activity. And there are usually Christmas decorations, sometimes all over the place. Even a decorated tree in the lobby. But somehow, the decorations seem either inappropriately bright or just kind of set around everywhere. A motel just is not the place that we would choose to spend Christmas, obviously. So isn't it a bit ironical that the first Christmas came to a motel, of all places? It would not have qualified for a modern chain hotel like the Hilton or the Marriott. As a matter of fact, it would probably make even the most meager of our economy hotels seem luxurious. But it was a motel, or sometimes called an inn. It was probably a series of thatch-roofed rooms that were built around a central courtyard. And the travelers probably brought their own food, including the pan in which to cook it, and their own bedding and their own firewood to set up the fire in the courtyard to cook their meal. So the motel in Bethlehem was probably sort of a shabby place, perhaps even several hundreds of years old. And this is the place, the sort of place, to which young Joseph and Mary came. They were tired and dusty from the road, and when they arrived at this particular motel, the no vacancy sign was out. Now, have you ever traveled too long on a road trip, wanting to make just a few more miles before you stop, and then come to a place without having a reservation? And there it is, the no vacancy sign. And even with a car and a credit card and money, it's an unpleasant experience to have a desk clerk just shake their head, no. No room at the inn. Well, if that's how we feel when we're traveling with all of our modern conveniences, how do you feel when you're traveling by foot, leading a donkey that carries all of your earthly belongings? And how do you feel when you simply can't just go on to another town? And still worse, how do you feel when you are a woman who is about to give birth, or a man who is responsible for her care? So how is it then when there is no room at the inn? What if part of the Christmas story is more than just a sentimental part of what we portray in Christmas pageants? What if this part of the story could be a description of our crowded, sometimes chaotic, confused, present life? What if whatever happened in Bethlehem is also a description of what happens in our own lives? What about those times when we ourselves put out our no vacancy sign? When we are really honest with ourselves, we realize that we all have a no vacancy sign at one time or another. We don't like to admit it, far from that. We'd like to convince ourselves and our world that we always have it all together. There are no empty places in our lives, and that we have everything we need. But the truth is, really, that we hang those no vacancy signs around the dark places in our spirit and the conflicted corners in our lives. There are rooms in which we just do not want Jesus to go in. None of us really want to acknowledge those times when we feel that hole in our soul, or the emptiness of our heart, or even the hollowness of our compassion, or the shallowness of our hope. But we all have those times. And it is to us, in those moments when we have those feelings, that Christmas comes. Christmas is nothing less than the clear announcement of our God, who never stops coming to search for people like Mary and Joseph, through whose lives God's new life, new peace, new hope can be born. Christmas is the story of our loving God who refuses to honor the no vacancy sign. All those signs we put up around our lives. We might even call this God intrusive. It is the intrusive God who is determined to be Emmanuel, God with us. The God we meet at the manger and the motel is the God who never stops knocking on closed doors, the closed doors of our lives sometimes, in order to come in. You may have heard of Wally. Wally's 9 years old. Wally was a fairly large 9-year-old, and some in his community like to call him a little bit slower than the other kids. But all the kids loved Wally because he had such a gentle spirit, and his heart was always for them, and he looked out especially for the smaller kids in the playground. And Christmas was coming, and you can imagine the excitement. You can feel it in our children here today. You know that they were excited and getting ready to act out the nativity story. We know how that is. We're getting ready to do that here. Well, the teacher decided to cast Wally in the role of the innkeeper. He had one line to remember. All Wally had to do was stand at the door of the inn and say, "No room, go away." Okay, so Christmas Eve came and the play was going really well. The shepherds didn't trip on their bathrobes, and the magi did not lose their gifts, and the angels were managing to keep their wings attached and their halos in place. And Mary and Joseph arrived at the inn and knocked at the door. And right on cue, Wally shot back, "No room, go away." But Joseph pleaded, "But sir, we have come such a long way, and we are tired from the journey." And again, Wally stood up straight and said, "No room, go away." And with all the dramatic emotion that 9-year-old Joseph could muster, he pleaded again and said, "But please, my wife is having a baby. Don't you have a room where a baby can be born?" And then there was silence as Wally stared at Joseph and Mary. And everyone in the congregation was getting a little antsy, and they wanted to help Wally remember his forgotten line. And finally, the teacher, who was off at the side, started to whisper really loud Wally's line from the side. And then the young Joseph put his arm around Mary, which was really a dramatic feat for a 9-year-old boy. And sadly, so sadly, they began to walk away. It was more than Wally's heart could take. He shouted out from the top of his lungs, "Wait! You can have my room!" And that's the story, isn't it? Christmas came to that inn, to that motel. And when Christmas comes to the motel of our lives, it means that Jesus comes to all places, in all people, in so many ways. It comes to the world of business and the world of leisure. It comes to those who are lonely and those who reach out to them. Christmas comes to a place of celebration or a place that is merely a stop along the way of life. Christmas even comes to those who don't want it, or those who don't have room for it. Christmas comes to those who are preoccupied and those who are filled up with other things. And Christmas comes to those who are away from home. And all of that is to say that Christmas comes to all of us. So in our Advent journey, as we take each day another step toward Christmas, we prepare our hearts for the coming anew of Christ in our lives. We are challenged to take down the no vacancy signs and allow Christ to come in. Like many of you, I have read the Nativity story many, many times, and I have been part of countless Christmas programs and pageants. And in those programs, just like with Wally and his story, we encounter Mary and Joseph searching for a place for Jesus to be born and met with what feels like cold rejection from the innkeeper. Only this Advent, as I was reading one of an Advent study, I read one sentence of that writer that just stopped me and made me think in a new way. And here's the sentence: there is no innkeeper in the gospel accounts. It's right. There is no innkeeper. There is none mentioned in any of the birth stories anywhere in the Bible. No innkeeper. What good news! For as we journey in our faith, we are welcomed by the God who gives the astonishing gift of Jesus, the gift of love. The love that became flesh in Jesus becomes flesh in all of us. the promise of Christmas coming into our lives is this: no reservations needed. Christmas comes. Jesus comes for all of us in all the places we may be. Will we make room for him? Amen.